Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a quick recap of what went down during last night's Committee of the Whole meeting for Minneapolis Public Schools. Heather, I know you got the itis. You're not feeling 100%, but you still wanted to do this today. How are you feeling this morning, Heather?
I'm hanging in there. I did not like missing the board meeting in person last night, but we're working on getting better. I feel like all of Minnesota is catching up on 2 years worth of cold germs.
Ugh, yikes. Well, yeah, that feels fair. And yeah, everybody, obviously, get your flu shot, protect yourself. But let's get into last night's board meeting. So, Heather, can you graciously give us the rundown?
Yeah, so last night we had a committee of the whole meeting and we really talked about quality of instruction. So we learned about how quality of instruction can translate down into the strategic plan. We heard that about quality instruction in math and in literacy. And we also heard about quality of instruction in English language learner pathways. One of the best parts of the evening was that we got to see an in real life presentation of what the Somali language heritage pathway looks like at Lindale Community School.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. We had two little kids there, a 6 year old and a second grader, and they like shared colors in Somali, and they taught the room how to teach or how to count to 10 in Somali, and then to 100 by tens in Somali. So that was really fun. Love seeing little kids there, and they were so brave and they're so shy and they were so excited. It was a real roller coaster of emotions with them. It was fun.
Oh, so true.
Um,
And I mean, it needs to be mentioned that at Lindale is where my children went to school, and it is a joy to see the one and only Farhia Dell be celebrated for the program that she has created. And it was great to see Lindale's principal there. I mean, really and truly, um, probably one of my favorite board meeting moments, maybe of all time.
yeah, yeah. I think it was everybody's favorite board meeting moment, and um, you know, in fact, so much so that we're actually elevating it out of the contention for most valuable moment because it was just too good, too perfect. It doesn't even feel fair to just to minimize it into a most valuable moment. And so, yeah, just a lot of celebration and love for that time, that effort that the Lindale team put into getting students there and coordinating whatever they need to coordinate, and then also the board members and the district staff for creating space for that. So yeah, so then after the presentation from all the schools where we heard from schools of at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, then the board questions went in. And then Heather, did you want to just talk a little bit about the board questions?
Well, I mean, some of the board questions were really kind of like, okay, so this is what we know we are striving for quality instruction. And now, how do we know that that's happening district wide? And how do we understand if that's happening in North Side schools or if that's only happening in South schools? We hear some great examples. What's happening in the schools where we aren't hearing these great examples from? And I think the board really wrestled with some of that tension. I don't necessarily know that. Um, they got all the answers that they needed. And I think we have some of those questions as well.
Yeah, yeah. I thought the board discussion um, was good, and a lot of it was centered around obviously the warm moment with the students, and also I think it represented a lot of confusion where we're at right now, and I think that yeah, I think that's where a lot of people are at and should be at after seeing all these presentations that we recently received. But I'm going to go into the slide of the night because I'm actually pretty excited about this slide. Um, I think it's important that as we continue to talk in education about everything, we actually really talk about and define what we mean by quality instruction. And I'll be the first one to tell you, uh, I don't necessarily know if this is the best or the worst definition, but it is a definition that at least we can share and operate with. And it breaks it down into these three things around cognitive science, core content knowledge, and culturally responsive and sustaining practices. So now it's really clear for us to be able to understand and be able to provide feedback, provide insight, ask questions about these three things, and like, are they happening in the classroom? What is the impact of these things in the classroom? How are teachers, how are ESPs getting support in professional development in these three areas? Like, I think it's very important that we this was named last night around like this is how the district is defining and thinking about quality instruction and what they mean. Especially at here in this other box, you can see the standards of effective instruction, and how all of these indicators are supposed to look like in the classroom or whatever. So I think it's important that the public understands like this is what the district is looking at when they are trying to define quality instruction. And now we can have a debate as a city if we want to about like, is this what it should mean, right? Like we should hear from principals, we should hear from teachers, we should hear from district staff, we should hear from the community and parents. Like, is this what we want? Does this make sense? So at least there's a definition, and we're not just talking about an amorphous buzzword that has no definition in quality instruction. So I'm really excited about that. If you cannot tell.
Yeah. I liked it too. And well, can I go into my most valuable moment then?
Yeah, yeah. Let's jump
Okay.
into it.
All
Again,
right. So,
again, we've elevated the
yeah.
moment with the students outside of the most valuable moment. That would have easily been it. But outside of that, Heather, go into your most valuable moment.
Okay, so when we talk about quality instruction, one of the things that we heard about during the presentation on academics is that part of the new K-5 math programming and curriculum is supposed to include this thing called number corners. That number corners should be happening for 20 minutes a day in every single classroom across K-5 classrooms. And then later on in the presentation, which I love hearing from schools because I like seeing how it actually happens, we heard from an elementary school what number corners look like in that classroom. I think that that is a tremendous example of communicating to the public at a board meeting what we can be looking for as parents and as community members when we go inside of schools. If number corners are the the thing that is supposed to be happening, that is supposed to be improving our math numbers, and then we see and hear a video, then I, as a parent, have an idea what I'm looking for when I go in, or I can ask about it at parent teacher conferences, or talk to my child's principal about. So to me, that was a great example of like, here's this theory we have over here, and then here's the strategy, and then here's what the implementation could and
So,
should look like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my most valuable moment is similar. It's connected to the quality instruction definition that they had, and it's connected to the last part around culturally responsive instruction. And so we heard from a couple of folks at Heritage Academy, and I thought it was really cool to hear them talk about it. Specifically, one teacher was talking about how at at Heritage, the population is 90% Somali, 90% Muslim. And so, I thought it was interesting for them to say, like, we are teaching using the framework of Bloom's taxonomy in our classroom, um, because we know that in mosques and in the Muslim faith, like that is what is being taught at home. Like that is how their teaching framework goes. And so like for them to have that and then have that consistent at home and then have that same similar consistency in the classroom, like I thought that was really interesting for us to be thinking about how are we learning about how families, how cultures are learning at home, and then how is that an extension of school as opposed to the other way around, right? Like we're a lot of times we're expecting schools to be the center of learning and then expecting families to extend that at home when really we should be figuring out like how our families, how our cultures obtaining knowledge, obtaining information, helping student development grow so that we can maximize everything that we're trying to provide for students in the classroom. So I just thought that was really interesting. And when we talk about, you know, culturally responsive instruction, again, getting away from like the buzzwords that we've been hearing around culturally relevant, culturally responsive, and really getting into like, what does that actually tangibly mean? And I thought, that was a really good example of, how Heritage is implementing it at their school with their students and how they're thinking intentionally about who they serve and then what does that mean around like what types of support and what types of philosophy um, they're implementing in the classroom. So that was it.
Yeah. Well, okay, so then if we were going to talk about my do better moment.
Sure. Gotcha.
So, my do better moment, kind of really has to do with the fact that we are now talking about, we are openly saying, so first of all, I'm excited that we're openly talking about the science of reading in board meetings. It's been a long time. As a former teacher, I'm a big believer in the science of reading, but we are now saying that we are using the science of reading district wide, and we aren't. Like, to be clear, some teachers have been willing and or able to give extra time and energy into different programming that's different from the curriculum, that's different than the professional development that is required of them. Some teachers, a very small portion of teachers, have been willing and able to go above and beyond to learn what now many people across the country are saying is the way, right? And that's a very small slice of the pie, and it is not happening system wide. And I think it is a little dishonest to say that the same curriculum that we are doing uh we're checking to see if it's, what's that word called? Now my brain is,
Audit. We're doing an audit
we're
of it.
doing an audit on this curriculum, and then the very next meeting we're saying, hey, this is the curriculum that is science of reading. I mean, it's not a full picture of what is actually happening in our district. And so it's like the up and the down, right? It's great to see positive examples, and we can't pretend positive examples are happening systemically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a similar, not specifically about the science of reading. I do agree with you, but I have a similar do better moment, and I think Director Arneson and Director Cerrillo and maybe a few other board members, I can't totally remember, um, kind of pointed to this as well, where it's now been I think 3 committee of the wholes that we've had this structure. We're hearing from principals, it's so awesome. We're hearing from teachers around what's going on in their classrooms. Um, and like we also need to recognize like they're showcasing, it's literally called a showcase. They're showcasing the best of the best, right? Like this is some of the best teachers doing some of their best work in their area or their lesson that they feel the most comfort in or that they're the most
Mm-hmm.
excited about sharing. um, and they come in, they do these presentations, we're all so inspired and motivated, and that's a huge part of being able to do a job well, right? Is like to be inspired, to be motivated. We need to talk more about what's happening positively in Minneapolis public schools. And there's such a big cognitive dissonance. There's such a big gap in between like what we are hearing is happening and is being represented is happening across the district during these board meetings, and then what is happening with students, right? And what is some of the data that we know, and all that kind of stuff. And that in the middle of that gap is supposed to be like what is the board supposed to do? What type of conditions can they create? What type of funding priorities do they need to make sure are there in order for the district to move forward, right? And I think that's, and like to actually make sure that every student is getting like the little slice that we all get during those board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know to what extent that's happening, and so I just feel like there's that gap, and we're not learning enough right now about the barriers. What are the challenges? What are like why isn't every student getting this? What's preventing every student from getting this right now? We're just getting like a little taste of what's happening in some classrooms with some of the best lessons with some of the best teachers in some of these buildings. And I think that's it's difficult honestly to like sit with. Every meeting I'm sitting there with this tension around like I don't want to be that guy, right? Like that's only thinking about like, oh, this isn't real, or this is just like one piece of the puzzle. And at the same time, like we keep getting hit over the head with all of this data about student fast scores, student reading scores, student suspension rates, like on and on and on. And it just doesn't feel like the whole picture. And I think it's important that the board knows that these things are happening in buildings, and also it's important for the board to know to what scale and what do they need to do in order to make sure that you know it reaches more students. So yeah, that is my do better moment.
Yeah, I think Director Elamine and you are on the same page with
Yeah,
that.
I think Director Elamine has brought this up consistently as well. Um, yeah, it's just hard. It's just frustrating to kind of try to put these pieces together because I think we are now operating in a sense of comfort, right? Like I think it brings us comfort to know
It
that
does. It
you know
does.
this is some of these things are happening in our schools, but then where is the sense of urgency also, right? Like
Mm,
this isn't happening for enough of our students
yeah,
across the district, and so
yeah.
anyway, I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was a meeting where we learned a lot and we still have a lot of questions. And so, as you continue to pay attention to school board meetings and to how your children are progressing in school, these are some of the tensions we're asking you to think about as well. As you talk and as you move throughout the community, it are one or two good examples. Is that enough? Is that how will we know that the strategic plan is being implemented, and how will we know that we are able to do this on a systems level? We don't know, but we're totally up for talking about it, and please leave your comments and your thoughts with us.
Awesome. Thank you for Heather working your way through this. I know you're not feeling your best, but appreciate you for doing this with me. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.